That morning, Lynn kissed her husband goodbye as he left for work. She pulled him into the bedroom and gave him a passionate kiss while pressing her leg against his crotch. She felt the effect her knee was having on him. When they heard their 6-year-old daughter's footsteps approaching, they broke the hug. Peeking out from behind the doorframe, she was curious to know what was happening. Lynn said, "Go and finish your breakfast, sweetie. We'll be out in a second." After the little girl disappeared again, Lynn brazenly grabbed her husband's bulge and squeezed it gently. "I hope you're taking your vitamins for work, honey. You'll need them when you get home tonight." He pulled her close for another kiss. God, she was so excited. But the gentleman interrupted the kiss. "We haven't been here for a long time, Lynn." "I know, dear. Sorry, I've been a little distracted lately, but starting tonight, I'm going to catch up. I'm making an appointment with you. See you later." With that, he walked into the kitchen, kissed the tops of his 3-year-old and 6-year-old children, and left for work. This morning, Lynn watched as there was an extra spring in his step. How she loved this man. When John opened the unlocked front door at the usual time and entered the house, Lynn was nowhere to be seen. "Where are you, sweetheart?" "Upstairs, my dazzling one." John walked up the steps until he reached the master bedroom. What he saw made him horny to the limit. It was the hottest sight he had ever seen. There was Lynn, completely naked except for a garter belt, stockings, and high heels, lying on the bed, lazily stroking herself. She smiled like a cat that had just lapped up a big bowl of cream and licked her lips. "I told you that today, everything would be special, didn't I?" Unable to contain his excitement, John literally tore off his clothes, losing 2 buttons on his shirt in the process. Lynn continued to play with herself. Having stripped naked, he walked over to the bed to climb into it. Before he could jump there, Lynn jumped up. "Patience, dear. Why don't you sit on that chair and enjoy the show?" Lynn carefully led John to a chair and pushed him onto it. He identified him as one from the kitchen. She straddled his lap and began to caress him, and then took his hands in turn and pushed them through the slats in the back of the chair. As soon as they were there, she reached over to the dresser and grabbed a pair of handcuffs. Then she grabbed his wrists one by one. She had to rise to reach his hands. The smell of her arousal filled the room and drove John crazy. He knew what awaited him. More than once they played a role in which they dominated him. But this time, everything was different. Having cuffed his hands, Lynn carefully but securely tied his legs with a soft rope. John was in heaven. Lynn then took out a wide leather belt, the type used by weightlifters, and pulled her stomach toward the back of the chair. John felt that there would be no rush. Lynn kissed him deeply and began to tease and caress his manhood until he climaxed. Lynn continued to kiss him as he came down from his high. Finally, he pulled away from her. "You're right. It was really something special, Lynn. The show has just begun, my love." John watched as Lynn walked over to the video camera, set up the tripod, and turned it on. She knew that this would be the only time, and she wanted to experience it again and again in the future. Then she went to the bathroom, opened the door, and entered it. No words on paper could explain how John felt when Lynn reappeared. His first reaction was definitely one of shock when she appeared leading a naked man. A quick glance showed that the newcomer was younger, taller, handsome, and more muscular than he was. His automatic flight reflex told him to flee from the superior creature. The problem for John was that he could not escape. John was still in shock when Lynn brought her willing captive to him. John had yet to decide whether he was a voluntary prisoner or not. "John, I want you to meet Simon. Simon, this is John." Simon looked at the helpless John and smiled. He had been having sex with Lynn for a month now, ever since she approached him at the gym. She was a great MILF. Why she married a loser sitting in a chair was a mystery to him. He suggested that some guys just want to be dominated and humiliated. Well, he could do it. That's how 2 policemen found them, called by a neighbor who heard Lynn's screams as Simon satisfied her sexual desires by completely humiliating and destroying John, who was still tied to a chair. The police tried to get the residents' attention by knocking on the front door. The combination of the distance from the bedroom and the busyness of the occupants ensured that their efforts were in vain. They spent several minutes debating the legality of entry before a woman's scream triggered their protective instincts. They were surprised to find that the door was unlocked. Following the ever-increasing noise, they ran up the stairs, drawing their revolvers. The scene that greeted them was strange. They might have been tempted to retreat quietly, but it looked like the guy tied to the chair was against it all. The first words of a superior senior officer would set off months of giggling in a bar frequented by off-duty police officers. "What the hell is going on here?" Still squatting, Lynn froze, then jumped up and grabbed a blanket from the bed to cover herself. The manic smile on her face disappeared almost instantly. Simon, with the guilty conscience of the intellectually deprived, hid behind it. John continued to thrash for a second until he realized that everything had gone silent. He looked around until he saw two puzzled officers. His look of disgust turned into an expression of relief, and then into an expression of fear. Kate, the senior officer, recovered the fastest. Tracking the room with her gun, she told her partner to deal with the guy on the floor. Junior straightened John's chair, then removed the gag, rope, and belt. He then held out his hand for the key to the handcuffs. Lynn silently pointed to the top of the dresser. The key was found, and the handcuffs were undone. When the gag was removed, John vented his anger. "Slut, bitch, what did I ever do to deserve this? We're done with you." When it looked like he was going to attack Lynn, Kate shouted for everyone to stand. She saw the rings on the woman's left hand, which prompted her next question. "Madam, which of these gentlemen is your husband?" He. An incredulous silence followed. John and Simon turned their heads and looked at each other. Both simultaneously saw their hands raised with fingers pointing at each other. The silence dragged on. Lynn just looked at the floor. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a faint but distinct plaintive cry. "Mamalia!" As a divorced single mother, Kate recognized the sound of a child in distress. She quickly walked down the corridor, opening the doors. The one at the top of the stairs was locked, but the key was stuck in the lock. She opened it to find the painful sight of a little girl with red eyes and bruises on her tiny fists. "I want to see my mother. Don't let them hurt my mom." Instinctively, the officer walked up to her and hugged her protectively. While she desperately clung to her, she put together a story in her head. The bitch locked this poor girl in her room while she had an orgy. She still didn't understand why both men thought the other was the father. She picked the girl up and carried her into the master bedroom. She peeked around the doorframe to make sure everyone was modestly covered and stood in the doorway. "Look, everything is fine with your mother." The girl looked into the room but turned away from obvious indignation and buried her face in the officer's neck. Lynn started to approach them, but Officer Kate shook her head angrily, and Lynn stopped. "Are any of these guys her father and your husband?" Lynn shook her head and looked at the floor again. "Yes, Pete. I'll take the girl downstairs. Call a couple more guys and get the child welfare officer on duty ASAP. Stay here and make sure they don't conspire until reinforcements arrive." "Got it, boss." With sufficiently strong evidence of child neglect, Kate had sufficient grounds to use force. A child services representative arrived 5 minutes before 2 additional officers arrived. The first quickly took charge of the little girl and began to examine her condition. After a few minutes, they established a fairly comfortable connection, and the girl complained of hunger and thirst. Kate's eyes flashed with anger, and she led the 2 stunt doubles up the stairs. She was already halfway there when she heard a knock on the door. A neighbor stood at the door and called the police. When it turned out that she had a daughter of about the same age, a joint decision was made to give the girl to a neighbor. It was logical that meeting a friend would benefit her. Kate joined the 2 new officers upstairs and briefed them. "I'll take a woman and you each take a guy. Remember, we want to know if the guy in the chair was being forcibly restrained and what they all knew about the girl locked in her room." Pete was tasked with finding a husband. There was ample evidence that there was a man living in the house who was supposed to be the husband. Pete quickly found the name from the envelope and soon conveyed the news to him to come home as soon as possible. 45 minutes later, the three policemen met again in the living room. John and Simon were easy, but getting Lynn to talk was harder than getting a cat out of a tree. Her habit of constantly looking at her watch drove Kate crazy. Kate opened the discussion. "What do you have, Mick?" "My boyfriend was Simon Smith. He had sex with someone else's wife for about a month. He said Lynn told him she and her husband wanted to act out a dominance fantasy. When he first saw the second guy, he was tied up. He claims he knew nothing about the little girl. He's big and stupid. I believe him. Now, I had that guy in the chair, John Chant. He had sex with someone else's wife for about 5 months. It is believed that his wife tricked him into tying him to a chair. He thought the other guy was her husband. So she deceived them both. Is there anything we can use?" "Well, we can talk to the prosecutor about illegal detention measures. The guy also said that his wife made him growl at her while he was tied up. It could have been sexual assault. He doesn't know if he wants to press charges, but he really wanted to get out of here by 6:30. Apparently, it is at this time that the husband usually returns home. He also knew nothing about the child." "How are you, boss?" "Well, I could tell you her orgy story, but you wouldn't believe me. She admitted to tying up this guy, John, but claimed it was all voluntary." Kate gritted her teeth before continuing. "The slut didn't seem to think it was a big deal to lock a 3-year-old girl in a room with no food or water and let her cry and bang on the door while she had sex. The poor thing thought that her mother was being beaten. Bring back the death penalty, that's all I can say." They separated again so Mick and Kate could ask their suspects about John's alleged sexual assault. Pete went to a neighbor's house to inform the child support worker. They had just finished when the door opened and a man's voice shouted, "Lynn?" Kate rushed out the door and intercepted her husband at the bottom of the stairs. The other officers noticed the look of fear on John's face and the look of horror on Lynn's face. Kate quickly sat Dave down and reluctantly but succinctly told him everything his wife had done. She saw a thunderous expression appear on his face. She deliberately left the story about his daughter for last. Dave immediately asked where she was, then rushed through the neighbor's door and hugged the precious child. Kate noticed how he had to bend over and turn sideways slightly to get through the front door. He returned with the child support worker, leaving his daughter to play. Once back in the living room, Kate asked him to stay there while she went upstairs with the support worker. With practiced ease, the woman handed Lynn a temporary restraining order prohibiting her from going within 200 meters of any of her children. Lynn lost consciousness. No one tried to stop her from hitting the ground hard. Kate did her duty and turned her into a position so that she would not swallow her tongue. The customer service employee tore the page from the notebook and stuffed it into Lynn's robe, and then finished the formalities. "You have an hour to vacate the premises. I'll be with your daughter where you should be, you stupid cow." She left, and Kate released the 3 officers. She followed them down the stairs. Simon and John walked behind her. When she saw the mountain man waiting at the foot of the stairs, John, who was walking ahead, retreated and tried to return. Simon took one look at the man's face, which made him look small in comparison, and even his tiny brain decided to join John in the master bedroom. Kate remained in the living room, while a 6-footer with a cold, stern expression walked up the stairs. She was standing alone in the living room when she heard a loud crash, followed by a scream. She slowly walked up the stairs, wondering when her next eye test would be. She had barely reached the top step when there was another crash and scream. She walked to the bedroom door and saw that the window frame had disappeared. She walked towards it and looked at the 2 writhing figures on the lawn behind the house. "What's happened?" "They both decided to leave my house through the window. It's funny how they got to the lawn. Yes, they both flew a little." "Did anything else happen?" "Well, on the way out, they both hit their heads a couple of times." "A couple of times each, right? What's smart people?" Kate looked at Dave. Dave looked at Kate. They both looked at Lynn as she lay there. "Your mom told you not to hit girls, didn't she?" "Yes, I'm afraid I did." "Okay, I'll stay until she leaves. You better bring her to her senses. I'll make us coffee." Dave woke up his wife well. He filled a toothbrush glass from the toilet tank and splashed it in her face. Lynn came to her senses and sat up. clearly disoriented. She saw Dave and everything came flooding back to her. Her heart sank, and her face fell. She jumped to her knees and crawled over, grabbing Dave's legs. He looked down with pitiless eyes. "Oh, Dave, dear, I only did this because I love you and respect you very much." "What the hell?" "Remember, I asked if I could tie you up and humiliate you, and you said, 'The day I let you do this to me, I will remove my manhood and start taking hormones to turn into a real girl.' Absolutely right. This was what I had to do. So I went and found a guy I could destroy instead of you. Someone disposable. I started with John, and today everything worked out. Now it's out of me, honey, and we can get back to normal." Dave just shook his head in disbelief. How could he have known her for so long and not suspect how insane she was? He continued in a low, menacing voice. "Is it true that your first marriage broke up when you found your husband with another woman, or he objected to your nefarious schemes just like I did?" Lynn's gaze fell to the floor and stayed there. Now was not the time to expose this lie. The very idea of taking a lover and humiliating him arose from her first husband's reaction to attempts to use him to satisfy her hidden need to humiliate a man with dominance. Dave didn't need her answer. "Even if I could forgive your depraved behavior, you locked our little Sophie in her room so you could have your little orgy." "I had to, Dave. At the last moment, the nanny canceled her visit. What choice did I have?" Again, Dave just shook his head. Apparently, Lynn was so excited that the thought of canceling the orgy didn't even cross her mind. Using every ounce of his inner strength, Dave controlled his voice, but his eyes glittered with hatred. "Did you know that Sophie heard your screams and thought you were in pain? Have you seen her little fists, all bruised from trying to get out from behind the locked door? Did you see her eyes, red from tears, and heard her voice, hoarse, from screaming?" Lynn's conscience was still fooling herself that her orgy was justified, but the accusations of what she had done to her daughter were serious. Without even looking Dave in the eye, she knew she was lost, entering unforgivable territory. Dave just wanted to kick her out of his house while Kate was still there. He knew he couldn't take responsibility for his actions if he was left alone with her, no matter what his mother taught him. "In case you weren't listening, you now have a temporary restraining order banning you from this house and anywhere near our children. If you don't get out of here in—" He looked at his watch. "47 minutes, you'll be arrested." Lynn heard his words and saw his unforgiving gaze. Rising up like a zombie, she grabbed the suitcase from the top of the closet. Dave left her to pack her things and went downstairs. Not only did he know that his marriage was over, but he also realized that he needed to decide the fate of his children. Could he leave them in the care of a hunted beast? Not a damn thing. He had a good start with witnesses and a restraining order, but he had seen too many clearly unsuitable mothers given custody to be confident that the system would make the right decision. He vowed to talk about this with his new friend, Kate. He was about to join her in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. He opened it in front of 2 reporters. In an instant, he received irrefutable proof of the existence of God. Will the mother of his children be able to survive the coming attack on children's services? Yes. Could she be a witness to the sexual assault charges and possible trial? Maybe. Will she be able to cope with the complete public destruction of her image as a mother? Of course not. Dave paused for a moment to ask himself if he could do this in good conscience. Unbidden, a vision of Sophie's face and small bruised fists appeared. Hell yes. He was indebted to his children. "Yes, I'd like to talk to you guys. Come in, please." Dave was still talking to them when Lynn left. They looked at her silently. Even journalists with their sociopathic tendencies could not enjoy the video of complete destruction on 2 legs. She was released without comment. They knew their photographers would do whatever was necessary on the street. Lynn could not yet know that in the space of 2 short hours, she had fallen from heaven to hell, from an apparently happy mother to a childless one, from a beloved wife to a lonely woman, anticipating that within the next 20, in 4 hours she had gone from being a respected member of society to being an outcast, which would have finished her off psychologically. Kate followed and watched her drive away. Dave apologized to his new allies and met her on the porch. "Thank you for your help, officer. You went above and beyond the call of duty, and on behalf of me and my children, I cannot thank you enough." "Glad to help a good guy, sir. Can I ask you something?" "Do not be shy. I know Child Services will look after Sophie in the future, but would you mind if I brought my daughter with me? She's the same age, and Sophie could probably use some distraction." Dave looked into Kate's eyes. He may have been wrong, but was this the hope he thought he saw? "I would really like that, Mrs. Kate. Just Kate and Miss." "Okay, Kate. I'm Dave. Sophie and I would like a distraction. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to pick up my eldest from her grandmother. I need to explain something to her." They looked into each other's eyes for a few seconds, then separated. Attacked by guilt, remorse, and her new social status, Lynn became a virtual recluse. It took Dave a week to get her to come see the kids. However, these efforts were in vain, as the children were very embarrassed. Their new friend Kate and her cheerful daughter helped them adapt a lot. Lynn's wish to have a video she could watch in the future came true. She had to watch him at the custody hearing, the sexual assault hearing, and the civil suit John brought against her. He did this because the sexual assault case ended with just a warning for Lynn. However, his application for a monetary reward for the complete destruction of his sexual desire was rejected. Publicly humiliated, he left town. Lynn would also have to watch the video at the divorce hearing, but she was too embarrassed to show up. She knew a hungry media would be waiting for her. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.